sound of a key sliding into a lock broke the silence of that December night. A quiet moment that would forever divide time into before and after. It was December 21st, 2020, in Donelson, Tennessee, and inside the apartment on Elm Hill Pike, Alexis Douglas and her boyfriend Gene Fernandez had no idea their lives were about to intersect with violence. "I bet you forgot I had this," were the words that shattered the peace as Samia Boyce Jr. stepped through the doorway, wielding both the key to Alexis's apartment and a loaded gun. Moments later, gunshots echoed through the rooms where two young children, ages 5 and 6, were also present. This wasn't supposed to be Alexis Douglas's ending. Not for someone who had already faced death as a mere infant and emerged victorious. Alexis Douglas was extraordinary long before tragedy found her. At just 2 months old, doctors diagnosed her with stage 4 neuroblastoma, an aggressive cancer that left her with only a 10% chance of survival. Most infants with such a diagnosis never see their first birthday. But Alexis wasn't like most people. She endured treatments that would challenge even the strongest adults: the surgical removal of a kidney, intensive chemotherapy, and radiation therapy that ravaged her tiny body. Her first battle wasn't on equal terms. She was just a baby fighting an enemy that overwhelms even the most resilient adults. Yet somehow, she survived. That early victory against impossible odds shaped everything about Alexis. It instilled in her a profound understanding that life is both precious and precarious. It taught her that survival alone isn't enough. What matters is how you use the time you've been given, and use it she did. Alexis grew into a woman of remarkable talents and passions. As a spiritual counselor and astrologer, she guided others through their darkest moments, using her intuitive gifts to help people navigate trauma and grief. Her own brush with death had given her insights that couldn't be taught, only lived. She channeled her energy into activism, founding R&R Village, a nonprofit dedicated to empowering Black communities.
My Black people, to my Black people.
American descendants of slavery. When she wasn't organizing community events, she was practicing as an intellectual property attorney, so accomplished that her name appeared in the World Trademark Review 1000, an international recognition of her legal expertise. And if that weren't enough, Alexis found joy in the culinary arts, establishing Alexis's Pantry, a cottage bakery in Columbus, Ohio, known for innovative desserts that delighted her community. The cruel irony cannot be overstated. Alexis survived a merciless disease that claims most of its victims. She built a life defined by helping others heal from trauma. Yet in the end, she couldn't escape the violence that entered her home through a door unlocked by someone she once trusted. This is the story of a woman who defeated one of nature's most ruthless killers, only to fall victim to a human one. It's about resilience and remarkable achievements, but also about the devastating consequences when boundaries are violated and control becomes an obsession. In the next 25 minutes, we'll examine how Alexis's extraordinary life intersected with a relationship marked by control and harassment. We'll look at how her ex-boyfriend's refusal to accept the end of their relationship eventually led to that fatal night. We'll analyze the missed opportunities for intervention that might have prevented this tragedy. And perhaps most importantly, we'll discuss what her story can teach us about recognizing patterns of domestic violence before they escalate to deadly outcomes. Alexis's story matters because she matters. Because her life was valuable not just for what she accomplished, but for who she was. And because understanding what happened to her might help save someone else. If you're interested in stories of resilience and justice like Alexis's, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps me continue bringing attention to these important cases that often go overlooked in mainstream media. By subscribing, you'll be notified when I release new videos that examine similar cases of courage in the face of adversity and the pursuit of justice for victims who can no longer speak for themselves. Hit that subscribe button now. It only takes a second, but it makes a tremendous difference in helping these stories reach a wider audience. After defeating a disease that claims 90% of its victims, Alexis Douglas embraced life with uncommon intensity. Her early confrontation with mortality wasn't just a medical footnote in her history. It became the foundation for everything she would build. Those who knew her best often remarked that Alexis lived with purpose, as though she understood the value of time in ways others couldn't comprehend. As Alexis matured into adulthood, she developed a multifaceted career that defied conventional boundaries. Her professional life wasn't limited to a single path, but instead reflected the fullness of her interests and passions. She possessed a rare ability to excel across vastly different domains, each connected by her fundamental desire to help others navigate difficulties. Her work as a spiritual counselor emerged from a deep, intuitive wisdom. Clients sought her guidance for processing trauma, finding meaning in suffering, and discovering paths toward healing. She incorporated astrology, meditation, and ritual into her practice, creating personalized approaches for each individual she served. Those who worked with Alexis described her ability to identify core issues with remarkable precision, seeing past surface problems to underlying wounds that needed attention. Alexis had this gift for making you feel truly seen, one client later told investigators. She could look at your astrology chart and somehow understand things about your life that you'd never told anyone. But it wasn't just the astrology, it was her presence. She listened like someone who knew the value of being heard. This empathetic approach extended to her work as an activist. The founding of R&R Village represented Alexis's commitment to community empowerment, particularly for Black Americans and descendants of slavery. The organization created spaces for healing, education, and community building. Under her leadership, R&R Village organized workshops on financial literacy, historical trauma, and collective healing practices. She believed deeply that individual healing was inseparable from community restoration. Her involvement with the Alternatives to Violence Project showcased her dedication to breaking cycles of harm. As a co-facilitator, she taught techniques for active listening, conflict resolution, and nonviolent communication. Participants in these workshops learned to identify triggers, manage emotions, and build community through mutual respect. Her contributions were so significant that she received recognition as a Peace Fellow, an honor that acknowledged her commitment to fostering communication across difficult divides. The intellectual rigor that characterized Alexis's spiritual and community work found another outlet in her legal practice. As an intellectual property attorney, she specialized in protecting the creative expressions of others. Her expertise in trademarks, copyrights, and online brand protection made her an invaluable resource for clients navigating complex legal terrain. This wasn't merely a career for Alexis, it was another avenue for empowering others, ensuring that their intellectual and creative contributions received proper protection and recognition. Her excellence in this field earned her international recognition. The World Trademark Review 1000 listed her among distinguished attorneys worldwide, an accomplishment that speaks to her meticulous approach and deep understanding of intellectual property law. Colleagues noted her ability to explain complex legal concepts in accessible terms, making her particularly effective with first-time entrepreneurs and artists unfamiliar with legal protections. Yet for all her professional accomplishments, Alexis found equal joy in the art of creating food that brought people together. Alexis Pantry emerged from her lifelong love of baking. The Cottage Bakery in Columbus, Ohio became known for inventive desserts that combined traditional techniques with unexpected flavors. This culinary venture wasn't simply a business, it was a natural extension of how Alexis built community. She often provided baked goods for neighborhood gatherings, family celebrations, and community events. The kitchen represented a space where she could transform simple ingredients into experiences that created connections between people. Food was another language for Alexis, her mother explained. When she baked for you, she was saying, "I care about your joy." She remembered everyone's favorites, what made them feel special and loved. At the heart of all these pursuits was Alexis's unwavering commitment to family and community. Despite her busy professional life, she maintained deep bonds with relatives and close friends. She participated actively in family traditions and created new ones, understanding that these connections form the bedrock of resilience in difficult times. The pattern throughout Alexis's diverse accomplishments reveals a woman determined to transform her own survival into something meaningful for others. Her early battle with cancer hadn't just taught her to fight, it had taught her why fighting matters. She understood that survival itself isn't the victory. It's what you do with the life you've been given. This perspective informed everything from her spiritual counseling to her legal practice, from her activism to her baking. Alexis approached each domain with the understanding that time is precious and that connection is essential. She lived as someone who had looked death in the face and decided that every day afterward would matter. The tragedy of Alexis Douglas's story lies partly in how much potential was lost, how many more lives she would have touched, how many more communities she would have strengthened. A woman who had already overcome impossible odds was building a life defined by service and connection. Her extraordinary resilience had transformed not just her own life, but countless others. Behind Alexis Douglas's impressive achievements and positive influence, a troubling dynamic was developing in her personal life. Her relationship with Samia Boyce Jr. had become increasingly problematic over time. What began as a romantic partnership gradually transformed into something more concerning. A connection marked by possessiveness and attempts to maintain control even as Alexis tried to move forward. According to those close to Alexis, the relationship had been on and off for some time. These fluctuations weren't simply the normal ebbs and flows of a typical relationship, but instead reflected deeper issues that would eventually lead to tragedy. Friends later described witnessing behaviors that concerned them. Moments where Boyce seemed unwilling to accept Alexis's autonomy or respect her decisions. The pattern of control manifested in various ways. Boyce displayed what experts in domestic abuse identify as coercive behavior, actions designed to maintain power and influence over Alexis, even when she attempted to establish boundaries. This control wasn't always obvious to outsiders. It existed in subtle comments, in expectations, and in reactions when Alexis asserted her independence. Family members noted that Boyce would often make demands regarding Alexis's time and attention. He expected immediate responses to messages and calls. When Alexis didn't comply, his behavior would escalate, moving from requests to demands, from disappointment to anger. These reactions created an environment where Alexis began to alter her own behavior to avoid conflict, a common response to manipulative dynamics. The most telling aspect of this controlling behavior emerged when Alexis attempted to create distance in the relationship. After recognizing unhealthy patterns, she took concrete steps to limit contact with Boyce. She blocked his phone number, a clear indicator that she wanted communication to cease. This boundary, which should have been respected, was instead treated as an obstacle to overcome. Boyce's response to being blocked revealed his unwillingness to accept Alexis's decision. Rather than respecting her clear desire for space, he found ways around the barrier she had created. He began using new phone numbers to contact her, effectively circumventing her attempt to cease communication. This persistent behavior, continuing to pursue contact after explicit rejection, demonstrated a concerning refusal to acknowledge Alexis's right to distance herself. Each new number represented another violation of the boundary Alexis had established. Each message or call was an assertion that her wishes were secondary to his desires. For those who study patterns of domestic abuse, this behavior raises significant concerns, as it indicates an individual who views their former partner's autonomy as negotiable rather than absolute. Perhaps most concerning of all was Boyce's retention of a key to Alexis's apartment. The key, a physical symbol of access and trust, should have been returned when the relationship ended. Its continued possession by Boyce represented an ongoing connection that Alexis hadn't consented to maintain. The key was more than just metal. It was a tangible representation of Boyce's refusal to accept the relationship's conclusion. Amid these difficulties, Alexis had begun to rebuild her life. Her relationship with Jean Fernandez represented a new chapter, one based on mutual respect rather than control. Friends described seeing Alexis happy again, enjoying the natural progression of a healthy partnership. She and Fernandez were creating positive memories and looking toward future possibilities. This new relationship likely intensified Boyce's sense of rejection. What had been abstract, the end of his relationship with Alexis, now had a concrete representation in Fernandez. For someone already displaying problematic behaviors related to control, this development potentially accelerated the progression toward violence. The behaviors exhibited by Boyce followed a trajectory that domestic violence experts recognize. The initial controlling behaviors, monitoring communications, making excessive demands for attention, reacting negatively to independence, established a foundation. The refusal to accept the end of the relationship by circumventing block numbers demonstrated an escalation. The retention of the key to Alexis's apartment indicated both an unwillingness to respect physical boundaries and a potential for future boundary violations. These behaviors collectively formed a pattern that professionals would identify as concerning. They represented more than just difficulty accepting a breakup. They showed a fundamental disregard for Alexis's autonomy and safety. In many similar cases, these behaviors precede acts of violence, particularly when the individual perceives that they are losing control completely. Yet despite these indicators, effective intervention never occurred. The system designed to protect individuals in Alexis's situation didn't engage effectively enough to prevent tragedy. There were opportunities, moments where different decisions or actions might have altered the outcome, but these opportunities passed without the necessary intervention. The absence of a restraining order left Alexis without legal protection from Boyce's continued harassment. Law enforcement wasn't sufficiently involved to recognize the potential for escalation, and personal safety measures, such as changing the locks, weren't implemented, perhaps because the true danger wasn't fully recognized until it was too late. If you're finding value in understanding the complex dynamics of this case, please take a moment to hit the like button and consider subscribing to this channel. Your engagement helps important stories like Alexis's reach a wider audience and potentially save lives. When we examine these cases together, we create collective awareness about relationship dynamics that may endanger those we care about. By subscribing, you'll join a community committed to learning from these tragedies, not for entertainment, but for education and prevention. Each like and subscription helps these crucial conversations reach someone who might need this information. Perhaps someone in your life is experiencing similar patterns of control and harassment. Your support of this content could provide them with insights that make a difference when it matters most. Thank you for being part of this important conversation. Now let's continue examining the events that led to that fateful December night. December 21st, 2020 began as an ordinary evening at Alexis Douglas's apartment on Elm Hill Pike in Donelson, Tennessee. The winter night settled over the neighborhood as Alexis and her boyfriend, Gene Fernandez, spent time together inside her home. Also present were two young children, ages 5 and 6, adding innocent laughter to what should have been a peaceful domestic scene. None of them knew that this ordinary evening would transform into something devastating, that the security of home would be violated in the most fundamental way. What transpired over the next few minutes would permanently alter multiple lives and end one remarkable life far too soon. The first indication of danger came with the sound of a key turning in the lock, a sound that should represent safety, someone authorized entering the home, instead heralded violence. The door opened, revealing Samia Boyce Jr., standing in the threshold of a home he no longer had permission to enter. His first words revealed both intention and a disturbing sense of entitlement. "I bet you forgot I had this." The statement wasn't just about the physical key in his hand. It was a declaration of continued access, a rejection of the boundaries Alexis had attempted to establish by ending their relationship. The key, which should have been returned when their relationship ended, had instead been kept as a means of maintaining control. What followed happened with horrifying speed. Boyce, having gained unauthorized entry to the apartment, produced a firearm. Without warning, he began shooting, targeting both Alexis and Gene Fernandez. The gunshots shattered the evening quiet, transforming a living space into a crime scene in seconds. Alexis Douglas, who had survived against impossible odds as an infant, who had built an extraordinary life of service and compassion, was struck multiple times. The wounds were immediately life-threatening. Despite all her strength and resilience, despite everything she had overcome, these injuries proved fatal. Alexis died in her own home, in a space that should have been her sanctuary. Jean Fernandez also sustained gunshot wounds during the attack. Unlike Alexis, he survived the assault, though his injuries were significant. His survival would later provide crucial testimony about the events of that night, helping investigators reconstruct exactly what had happened in those terrible moments. Perhaps most disturbing was the presence of the two young children, ages 5 and 6, in the home during the shooting. Though they were not physically injured during the attack, they were exposed to violence no child should witness. In the aftermath, authorities ensured these children were placed with family members, but the psychological impact of witnessing such an event would require long-term support and care. Neighbors who heard the gunshots called emergency services. Police and paramedics arrived quickly. But for Alexis, it was already too late. First responders found a scene that spoke to the sudden violence that had erupted in this otherwise ordinary apartment. Jean Fernandez received immediate medical attention and was transported to a nearby hospital for treatment of his injuries. Law enforcement immediately began processing the scene, collecting evidence that would be crucial in identifying and prosecuting the perpetrator. Shell casings, the position of furniture, and other physical evidence told the story of those violent moments, helping investigators reconstruct the sequence of events. The nature of the attack revealed significant premeditation. This was not a crime of sudden passion or opportunity. Boyce had maintained possession of the key specifically to retain access to Alexis's space. He had chosen a time when he knew both Alexis and her new boyfriend would be present. The statement about the key, "I bet you forgot I had this," indicated he had been planning this moment, anticipating the shock and fear his unexpected entry would cause. The motive behind the attack appears rooted in a toxic combination of jealousy, rejection, and a desperate attempt to reassert control. Psychology experts who reviewed the case noted that Boyce's behavior followed patterns seen in other domestic homicides, where the perpetrator cannot accept that a relationship has ended. His actions suggest he viewed Alexis as a possession rather than an autonomous individual with the right to move forward with her life. Particularly telling was his decision to target both Alexis and Jean Fernandez. By attacking them both, he was eliminating the new relationship that represented Alexis's independence from him. This dual targeting further supports the theory that jealousy and a need for control were central to his motivation. The murder of Alexis Douglas represents a devastating form of final control. When physical and emotional domination can no longer be maintained, the ultimate act of violence serves as a last assertion of power. It's a tragic pattern repeated too often in cases of domestic violence, where the most dangerous moment frequently comes when the victim attempts to permanently end the relationship. What makes this case particularly heartbreaking is the contrast between how Alexis lived her life, helping others heal from trauma, and how it ended in an act of violence that created new trauma for everyone who knew and loved her. In the aftermath of the shooting, the Metro Nashville Police Department quickly identified Samia Boyce Jr. as the primary suspect. Evidence recovered at the scene, combined with witness testimonies, pointed definitively to his involvement. However, the path to justice would prove complicated, illustrating the challenges that often emerge in domestic violence cases. Despite the initial clarity regarding the suspect's identity, unexpected complications arose. Boyce contested the identification, claiming that witnesses had misidentified him. This led to a temporary withdrawal of the warrants against him, a procedural step taken to ensure the case would stand on solid legal ground. This pause, while necessary for legal thoroughness, created additional anxiety for those awaiting justice for Alexis. A dedicated manhunt commenced, with the U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force taking a leading role in the search for Boyce. Law enforcement agencies coordinated their efforts, understanding the potential danger posed by a suspect who had already demonstrated a willingness to use deadly violence. Their persistence eventually paid off with Boyce's apprehension, bringing at least a measure of relief to Alexis's family and friends. The legal proceedings that followed demonstrated the complexity of prosecuting domestic violence cases effectively. Issues emerged regarding witness credibility and the challenge of accurately reconstructing events amid conflicting accounts. Each delay and legal maneuver added to the emotional burden carried by those who loved Alexis, highlighting how the pursuit of justice can sometimes feel like another form of trauma for survivors and families. Looking beyond the specifics of the investigation and legal process, the Alexis Douglas case reveals profound systemic failures in protecting individuals from domestic violence. Despite clear indicators of problematic behavior, persistent harassment, boundary violations, and possessive conduct, insufficient protective measures were implemented. These gaps in protection aren't unique to this case, but instead reflect broader institutional shortcomings in addressing relationship violence. One critical failure involved the inadequate response to Boyce's pattern of harassment. When Alexis blocked his number, only to have him contact her using new numbers, this persistence should have triggered more significant concern from authorities. Such behavior typically indicates an escalating situation, rather than a person simply having difficulty accepting a breakup. The absence of a restraining order left Alexis vulnerable to continued contact and ultimately to physical harm. While legal protection orders cannot guarantee safety, they provide an important tool for law enforcement intervention before violence occurs. They also create a documented history of concerning behavior that can help authorities recognize escalating danger. Simple personal safety measures might have altered the outcome of this case. Changing the locks after the relationship ended would have prevented Boyce from using his retained key to enter the apartment. This straightforward step, replacing locks when relationships change, represents an essential safety practice that might have created a critical barrier between Alexis and danger. The case highlights the necessity of identifying concerning behaviors in relationships before they escalate to violence. Persistent attempts to maintain contact after rejection, refusing to return items that provide access to personal space, and expressions of excessive jealousy regarding new relationships all merit immediate attention. These behaviors often precede violence and should prompt both personal safety planning and legal intervention. Addressing cases like Alexis's requires meaningful reform at multiple levels. Law enforcement agencies need specialized training to better identify high-risk domestic situations before they turn deadly. The temporary withdrawal of warrants in this case points to procedural challenges that can delay justice and potentially endanger others. Streamlining these processes while maintaining necessary legal protections represents an important balance to achieve. Legal institutions must develop improved protocols for handling domestic violence cases, recognizing their distinct dynamics and potential for rapid escalation. Courts need to prioritize cases involving patterns of harassment and boundary violations, understanding that delays can have life or death consequences for victims. Among the tragedy of this case, Alexis Douglas's legacy deserves recognition. She dedicated her life to helping others heal from trauma, to building community, and to creating spaces where people could grow beyond their pain. The most meaningful tribute to her life would be creating systems that prevent similar tragedies, that protect others from experiencing the violence that took her life. The organizations she founded, the communities she nurtured, and the individuals she guided all carry forward aspects of her vision. Through them, her impact continues despite her absence. Her work with the Alternatives to Violence Project seems particularly poignant now, a reminder that addressing violence requires both individual healing and collective change. If this story moved you, please share it with others who might benefit from these important lessons. Your single share could reach someone who needs this information right now. Someone who might recognize similar patterns in their own life or in the life of someone they care about. Knowledge saves lives in cases like these, and your help spreading this awareness matters tremendously. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your support enables more stories like Alexis's to be told with the depth and care they deserve. Join me next week for another case that offers critical insights into protecting ourselves and our communities from preventable tragedy. Together, we can honor victims like Alexis Douglas by learning from their stories and working toward a world where such violence becomes increasingly rare.